When we are in a relationship, most of us naturally believe that being kind, loving, and supportive will bring out the best in the other person. We are taught from childhood that if you do good, good comes back to you. But modern psychology reveals a much darker reality. Sometimes, your absolute best qualities, your empathy, your warmth, your willingness to praise others, can actually become the very reasons you are targeted by someone who wants to exploit you. Today, we are diving deep into the psychology of narcissistic relationships, exploring how they operate, how they dismantle a person's identity, and how you can truly heal and reclaim your sense of self. Joining us today is renowned psychologist, Dr. Sabrina. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I think this conversation is incredibly vital right now because we live in a culture where terms like narcissism are thrown around constantly, yet the profound emotional devastation it causes behind closed doors remains largely misunderstood. I am really looking forward to unpacking this with you today.
I want to start by addressing exactly what you just mentioned. If you scroll through TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram today, you cannot escape the word narcissist. It seems like everyone is suddenly labeling their ex, their boss, or their parents as narcissistic. Because the term has become so trendy, it feels like the true meaning is getting lost in the noise. Could you clarify the actual difference between someone having narcissistic traits and someone clinically suffering from narcissistic personality disorder? Because it seems like this distinction is muddying the waters for a lot of people trying to make sense of their experiences.
You have hit on a very critical point. There is a massive difference between narcissism as a personality style and narcissistic personality disorder, which we call NPD. Narcissism itself is essentially a personality spectrum. We all have different personality traits, and some people sit higher on the narcissistic spectrum. It is a highly maladaptive way of interacting with the world, because it places the individual at odds with everyone else. It ruins relationships, breeds conflict, and creates an environment of selfishness. But in and of itself, having a narcissistic personality style is not a formal medical diagnosis. NPD, on the other hand, is a very specific clinical disorder defined in psychiatric manuals. To be diagnosed with NPD, a person has to display a chronic, pervasive pattern of behavior that includes a profound lack of empathy, a constant need for excessive admiration, an intense sense of entitlement, grandiosity, and arrogance. This behavior must consistently manifest across all areas of their life, in their career, their family, and their friendships. The mechanical difference is simply that a person with NPD has actually sat down in a licensed clinician's office, and that therapist has formally issued a diagnosis. But here is the catch that most people do not realize. The vast majority of severely narcissistic people in the real world will never, ever step foot inside a therapist's office to get diagnosed. Why would they? Part of their pathology is the absolute belief that they are flawless and that everyone else is the problem. So, you have millions of people dealing with individuals who have extreme, malignant narcissistic traits, but who will never carry the official label of NPD. In fact, many clinicians do not even like using the diagnosis anymore because it can feel stigmatizing and rarely helps the patient change. So, when we discuss this publicly, it is much more useful to focus on the patterns of narcissism rather than getting bogged down in the clinical weeds of whether they have a formal diagnosis or not. The damage they cause to their partners is exactly the same, regardless of a piece of paper from a doctor.
That makes so much sense, and it really removes a lot of the confusion. But it leads me to wonder about the cultural shift we are seeing. Why does it feel like more people than ever before are suddenly dealing with narcissists? If you talk to a friend today, they will often say they are healing from a toxic, narcissistic relationship. Has there actually been a massive rise in the number of narcissistic people in the world, or is it just that our awareness has changed?
Narcissism has always been here. As long as human beings have existed, narcissism has walked the earth. If you open up any history book, you will find that a significant percentage of the historical figures we read about, the invaders, the conquerors, the authoritarian rulers, were profoundly narcissistic. Narcissistic people make history because they are driven by an obsessive need for power, status, and legacy. They live in a grandiose fantasy world and possess the ruthless drive to force reality to bend to their desires. Quite frankly, many of the greatest technological leaps and societal innovations we enjoy today were driven by highly narcissistic individuals who possessed an out-of-the-box mindset. My advice to people is always to let them innovate, just do not go on a date with them. The difference today is not necessarily that there are more narcissists, but that psychology is still a very young science. We have only been systematically studying the human personality for less than 2 centuries. For thousands of years, cultures were organized in deeply patriarchal and authoritarian structures where a certain level of emotional coldness and dominance was universally accepted. People just thought, well, that person is an absolute jerk, or that ruler is cruel, and they radically accepted it as a harsh reality of life. Before the internet and social media platforms gave us a universal vocabulary, someone would just sit with their friend and say, "My partner is so incredibly selfish, they treat me poorly, and I cannot figure out why I feel so crazy around them." Now, because of social media and books on the subject, we finally have a framework. We have a shared vocabulary that connects these dots. People are realizing that these bizarre, painful behaviors are not isolated incidents. They are part of a highly predictable, universal pattern. The dangerous side of this sudden cultural awareness, however, is that the internet can be incredibly punishing. When a victim finally gathers the courage to speak up and say, "I think my partner might be narcissistic," the online community is often quick to shame them, saying, "Who are you to diagnose someone? You are just throwing around buzzwords." This leaves an already traumatized person feeling isolated and doubted all over again. That is why we need to focus less on the medical labels and more on the actual toxic behaviors that are actively harming people.
It is incredible how having the right vocabulary can validate an experience that previously felt impossible to explain. Now, before we look at the deep psychological impact of these relationships, I want to talk about prevention. A question that plagues so many survivors is, how do I stop attracting these people? Is there a specific character flaw or a vulnerability in certain individuals that makes them magnets for narcissists? That is a beautiful way to shift the perspective from self-blame to self-protection. Let us talk about that carousel. Can you walk us through the consistent, predictable pattern of how a narcissistic relationship unfolds? What does it look like from the early honeymoon phase to the eventual breakdown?
I really want everyone listening to hear this clearly, because this is where so much self-blame happens. If you have attracted a narcissist into your life, it is not because you are weak, broken, or lacking self-esteem. Narcissists are attracted to you because you are genuinely attractive. And when I say attractive, I do not just mean physical beauty or a great physique, though that can certainly be a part of it because narcissists love status symbols. I mean, you possess something valuable that they want to consume. You might have social status, you might have wealth, or you might possess a deep, vibrant sense of self-possession and inner power. There is a common, incorrect assumption that narcissists only target shrinking violets who have zero confidence. In my clinical practice, I have seen some of the most successful, strong, and well-adjusted individuals get completely dismantled brick by a narcissistic partner. Narcissists run on what we call narcissistic supply. Supply is the validation, attention, praise, and emotional energy they need to survive. If you are a genuinely kind, empathetic person who naturally looks for the good in others and offers genuine praise, you are the ultimate source of high-quality supply. Your light is what attracts them. So when people ask me, do I have to stop being a nice person so I don't attract them? My answer is absolutely not. You do not change your beautiful nature. They will be attracted to you. And you might even feel a momentary spark of chemistry with them, because they are highly skilled predators. The secret is not preventing the attraction. The secret is learning how to recognize the red flags early, and getting off the carousel before it starts spinning too fast. To understand the pattern of the relationship, you first have to understand the internal mechanics of the narcissistic person. I want you to picture a narcissist as a volcano. Deep inside that volcano is a boiling, volatile lake of intense shame, insecurity, and emotional instability. Because that shame feels life-threatening to them, they desperately need a heavy lid to plug the top of the volcano and keep all that vulnerability under wraps. That lid is made of their narcissistic traits. Grandiosity, the delusion of perfection, entitlement and arrogance. It is a completely unconscious defense mechanism. However, as they go through daily life, ordinary events will constantly nudge that lid out of place. It could be minor feedback at work, a slight criticism, a partner expressing a boundary, or even something as trivial as getting stuck in traffic or not getting the exact table they wanted at a restaurant. The moment that lid shifts, the terrifying core shame is exposed, and the volcano erupts. The lava that pours out is their characteristic narcissistic rage, reactivity, and cruelty. Now, when this dynamic enters an adult relationship, it manifests as a highly destructive cycle. The early phase is what we call love bombing. It is an intensely idealized, intoxicating period where the narcissist showers you with overwhelming affection, gifts, constant communication, and seemingly deep attention. They make you feel like the center of the universe. But what you do not realize at the time is that this intense attunement is actually a data-gathering mission. They are learning everything about your history, your insecurities, your fears, and your deepest secrets. Months down the road, when the relationship shifts, they will weaponize that exact vulnerability against you to destabilize and shame you. As the relationship progresses, the love bombing fades, and the ratio of behavior changes. At first, it might be 10 incredibly wonderful days followed by one bizarre, cruel day. You brush it off, thinking everyone has a bad day. Then it becomes 9 good days and 2 bad days. Eventually, the ratio becomes completely unpredictable, throwing you into a state of hot and cold, presence and absence. This erratic shifting is the exact origin of the trauma bond. It triggers a profound cognitive dissonance in the victim. Your brain is desperately trying to reconcile the incredibly sweet person from the first 3 months with the cold, critical stranger standing in front of you. You start frantically unpacking your own identity, turning yourself inside out, trying to figure out what you did wrong to cause this shift. The narcissist shifts the blame entirely onto you, utilizing tactics like gaslighting, minimization, and future faking, making grand promises about the future just to keep you hooked on the line. Over time, they objectify you. You are no longer a human being with independent needs. You are treated like a convenient utility, much like a coffee cup. As long as the cup holds their coffee, it is useful. If the cup suddenly asks for its own needs to be met, it becomes an absolute inconvenience. To keep the relationship alive, the victim is forced to entirely abandon their own reality and adopt the distorted reality of the narcissist. Ultimately, once the narcissist feels they have completely secured your supply, they often get bored due to their high need for novelty, leading to a brutal emotional discard or a continuous cat and mouse game of pulling you back in through hoovering just as you start to heal.
Hearing that sequence mapped out is deeply chilling because it highlights how systematically a person's reality is eroded. When people are trapped in this cycle, what are the most common excuses and justifications they tell themselves that prevent them from breaking free and starting their healing journey? Why do we stay so long?
We stay because of one of the most fundamental, primal human needs in existence: the need for attachment. Human beings are inherently tribal creatures. We evolved in social groups, and our brains are hardwired to seek connection, love, and safety within a pack. We cannot survive as entirely solo acts. To understand why an adult justifies a toxic relationship, we have to look at the psychological backstory of childhood. When a child grows up with an abusive, neglectful, or emotionally volatile parent, that child cannot simply pack their bags, look for a new family, and leave. Their survival depends entirely on maintaining an attachment to that caregiver. Because the child cannot afford to accept the terrifying truth that their parent is unsafe, their psyche makes a desperate compromise. They internalize the blame. The child thinks, if I can just be a better, quieter, more perfect kid, mommy or daddy will love me. They learn to entirely suppress their own feelings to cater to the emotional whims of the adult. Fast forward to adulthood, and that exact same survival blueprint gets projected onto their romantic relationships. When a partner treats them badly, the adult survivor's brain automatically fires up the old childhood justifications. They tell themselves, they are just under an immense amount of stress at work, they had a really traumatic upbringing, I am no picnic to live with either, or we had such a magical weekend last month. I know the real them is still in there. These rationalizations are incredibly easy to lean on because the outside world constantly reinforces them with generic advice like, relationships take hard work, or marriage is about compromise. The people who are most vulnerable to getting deeply trapped in these trauma bonds are, ironically, the most highly empathetic and compassionate individuals. Empathy naturally drives a person to look at a situation from multiple points of view and find reasons to forgive. But in a toxic relationship, your beautiful empathy is weaponized against you, transforming into a mechanism that forces you to constantly forgive a repeat perpetrator at the direct expense of your own sanity.
That connection back to childhood survival mechanisms is a massive revelation. It explains why the bond feels so unbreakable. Let us talk about the true aftermath. What is actually happening to a person on a deep scientific, neurological, and psychological level after they have endured months or years of this kind of systematic psychological abuse?
The impact of narcissistic abuse is profound, and we see an incredibly consistent set of psychological symptoms across thousands of survivors. It mimics many aspects of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. First and foremost, we see a destructive level of chronic rumination. The victim's mind becomes trapped in an endless loop, replaying conversations, analyzing arguments, and drowning in intense regret, self-blame, and profound self-doubt. There is an incredibly high level of hypervigilance. Their nervous system is stuck in a perpetual fight or flight state, constantly scanning their environment, walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate the next emotional explosion or withdrawal. This constant stress alters their brain chemistry, leading to severe sleep disturbances, changes in appetite, and chronic concentration issues. We also observe a unique form of mild dissociation. Because their subjective reality, their feelings, and their thoughts were systematically invalidated for so long, they have essentially dissociated from their own body and their own true nature. What is fascinating clinically is that while some survivors develop clinical depression, many do not fit the typical profile. When a survivor is removed from the toxic environment and placed around healthy, supportive friends, they can appear wonderfully animated, loving, and highly functional. They can roll up their sleeves and be magnificent, attentive parents. But the moment they are drawn back into the sphere of the narcissist, the heavy toll is instantly visible. Another groundbreaking realization we are seeing in our clinical community is that for many survivors, their extreme empathy and kindness actually function as a prolonged fawn trauma response. Fawning is a survival mechanism where an individual attempts to appease a threat by becoming completely compliant, incredibly helpful, and hyper-attentive to the abuser's needs. Survivors often carry an immense amount of hidden shame, asking themselves, why was I so incredibly nice to someone who was actively destroying me? In therapy, my primary goal is to help them understand that their kindness was a beautiful, instinctive effort to survive. Healing is not an amputation of your empathy. It is about pulling the shame off your kindness, keeping your loving core intact, but building a powerful, unshakable layer of discernment so you can protect yourself in the future.
I love that distinction, that healing is not an amputation of your core traits. But it must be incredibly difficult for friends and family to watch someone they love continue to show empathy toward a person who has caused them so much pain. This brings up the massive, often controversial topic of forgiveness. Is forgiveness a mandatory requirement for someone to truly heal from narcissistic abuse?
I am going to be completely frank with you. Stop the presses, because it is absolutely not mandatory. I take huge issue with the quick, cliché advice floating around social media that claims you can never truly heal until you forgive your abuser. There is a robust body of scientific, psychological research proving that repeatedly forgiving a chronic, unrepentant perpetrator actively harms the well-being of the forgiver, lowering their mood and exacerbating symptoms of anxiety and depression. Forgiveness is a deeply personal, sacred choice, and it is entirely unnecessary for genuine psychological recovery. There are people who have harmed me immeasurably in my life. I do not forgive them, and I have healed just fine. We have to allow survivors to hold multiple, complex truths simultaneously through what I call a multiple truths exercise. A survivor can look at their reality and say, This person is my mother. She had a horrific childhood of her own. I understand the trauma that made her who she is. She treated me terribly. She will never change. I feel pity for her lonely life, and what she did to me is absolutely unforgivable. Forgiveness is a deeply personal, sacred choice, and it is entirely unnecessary for genuine psychological recovery. There are people who have harmed me immeasurably in my life. I do not forgive them, and I have healed just fine. We have to allow survivors to hold multiple, complex truths simultaneously through what I call a multiple truths exercise. A survivor can look at their reality and say, "This person is my mother. She had a horrific childhood of her own. I understand the trauma that made her who she is. She treated me terribly. She will never change. I feel pity for her lonely life, and what she did to me is absolutely unforgivable." All of those statements can be 100% true at the exact same time. You can maintain a state of cognitive empathy, understanding the mechanics of why they are broken, without offering them the gift of emotional forgiveness. My stance is one of mild indifference. I wish them no ill will. If good things happen to them, so be it. If bad things happen, so be it. But they are no longer allowed in my life, because I know with absolute certainty that if I let them back across my boundaries, they would repeat the exact same harmful behavior tomorrow.
That distinction between understanding someone's past and refusing to forgive their ongoing cruelty is incredibly empowering. Another phrase you dedicate a massive amount of focus to in your work is radical acceptance. Could you define exactly what radical acceptance means in the context of escaping a narcissist? Because many people mistake acceptance for giving up. It sounds like the deepest grief is not just losing the other person, but facing how much of yourself you completely lost while trying to keep that relationship alive. When someone is standing in the wreckage of a dissolved identity, feeling completely clueless about who they are, what is the practical, immediate starting point to begin rebuilding?
Radical acceptance is the absolute, unshakable recognition of reality exactly as it is, without trying to fight it, excuse it, or wish it away. In a narcissistic relationship, radical acceptance means accepting three painful truths. These toxic behavioral patterns are never going to change, the relationship will never become the healthy partnership you desire, and as long as you remain within this person's orbit, they will continue to deeply hurt you. Some people think that once they radically accept that a person is a narcissist, their words will magically stop hurting, as if they swallowed a pill that turned them into concrete. But you have a human soul and a fragile psyche. Cruelty will always hurt, no matter how much you understand the psychology behind it. The core of true mental health is psychological flexibility, the capacity to adapt, self-soothe, reflect, and navigate disappointment. Narcissism is the exact opposite. It is a profoundly rigid, inflexible personality style. Grandiose narcissists genuinely believe they are exceptional human beings. A man can cheat on his partner, lie to his family, and still look at himself in the mirror and say, "I am a great guy who would do anything for anyone." Because their self-schema is so entirely delusional, they possess zero internal motivation to change. When I sit with a client who is stuck in a loop of hope, I look them in the eyes and ask, if I could guarantee you with 100% certainty that this person will be exactly like this forever, how would that reality alter the decisions you make today? That is the moment the penny drops. They stop waiting for the promotion, stop waiting for the kids to grow up, stop waiting for the retirement that they think will fix things. But when you finally look at reality with absolute, raw clarity, the immediate result is not peace. It is a tsunami of profound grief. You are forced to mourn the death of a narrative, the death of a lifelong hope, the loss of the parent you always deserved to have, or the future you thought you were building with your partner. Grief is the most raw, universal human experience, and you cannot soldier through it or speed it up. It is during this intense wave of grief that many survivors panic and run back to the toxic relationship, because the pain of mourning feels too heavy, making them doubt their own sanity all over again. When you are completely disconnected from your own identity, asking yourself massive questions like, "What is my purpose in life?" or "Who am I?" is far too overwhelming. It causes the brain to freeze. I tell survivors that we have to go back to the absolute molecular basics of human existence, starting with physical, biological sensations. I instruct my clients to set a timer on their phone 3 times a day. When that notification rings, they must stop and ask themselves basic physiological questions. Am I cold right now? Am I hot? Am I hungry? Thirsty? Do I need to use the restroom? It sounds incredibly simplistic. But you have to realize that for years they were told, you can't be cold, it's warm in here, or you can't be hungry, we just ate. Their physical boundaries were entirely overwritten. Relearning how to walk over to the thermostat and adjust it based purely on your own internal comfort is a profound act of reclamation. The next step is practicing low-stakes autonomy. I will ask a client, what do you actually want on your pizza? You would be amazed at how many highly successful adults are utterly flummoxed by that question. They will instinctively start saying, well, my husband always liked pepperoni, and then they catch themselves. Training your brain to pause and declare, I personally want mushrooms and olives, is how you begin to anchor your subjective focus back into reality. As you master these small physical choices, you gradually move up the ladder toward deeper values, meaning and purpose. In the early stages, meaning might simply be getting through 24 hours without obsessing over what the narcissist is doing, and that is a massive victory to be celebrated.
It is beautiful to think that reclaiming your life starts with something as small as choosing your own pizza toppings. You also mentioned the critical importance of having external people to validate your reality. How vital is a safe community in breaking the spell of gaslighting?
It is absolutely everything. Gaslighting leaves you entirely unable to trust your own senses, so you need external, safe, validating individuals whom I call anti-gaslights. I experienced a perfect example of this in my own life just today. I had to take a business call on speakerphone while someone was working quietly in my house. The individual on the other end of the line was incredibly dismissive, profoundly disrespectful, and overtly rude. Because I have my own history with narcissistic abuse, my ancient programming immediately fired up, and I began internally asking myself, am I being way too sensitive here? Am I being unreasonable? As these doubts raced through my mind, the lady working in the room caught my eye, rolled her eyes in sheer disbelief at the person's behavior on the phone, and whispered, "Yeesh, that was absolutely ridiculous. I cannot believe how dismissive she was to you." In that single micro moment, I felt entirely whole. My internal reality was mirrored and validated by a safe, neutral third party. That tiny adjustment allowed me to instantly regain my confidence, trust my assessment of the situation, and confidently decline the business offer. This is exactly why safe friendships, support groups, and therapy are non-negotiable for recovery. Survivors are so dangerously accustomed to bad behavior that they accept it as standard business as usual. Surrounding yourself with people who say, "That was not okay," gives you the borrowed courage to make bold choices. I advise survivors to practice the 90-10 inversion. Most victims pour 90% of their precious emotional energy into managing their most toxic relationship, leaving a measly 10% for the easy, loving, reciprocal friendships in their life. You have to flip the mathematics entirely. Put 90% of your soul into the safe spaces, and completely phone it in with the toxic ones.
Flip the mathematics. That is a brilliant rule of thumb. As people go through this journey of rebuilding their safe spaces, they often find themselves fluctuating violently. One day they feel incredibly confident, and the next day they are crying on the floor, feeling completely lost again. What do you tell someone who is terrified by this intense emotional instability?
I tell them to completely embrace the oscillation because oscillation is the natural process of emotional calibration. Think of a toddler who is learning how to take their very first steps. They wobble, they lose their balance, they fall, and they stand back up. They are calibrating their equilibrium. When you are healing, the intense wobbliness you feel is simply the old, internalized voice of the narcissist fighting a battle against your newly emerging, individuated self. That critical, toxic voice has been an unwanted tenant in your mind for years, and it will not leave without a fight. The narcissist likely spent years mocking your ambitions, telling you, "Do you really think you can pull that off? You are reaching way too high." When you try something new today, that old voice echoes, screaming that you are going to fail, so you do not even bother trying. You have to look at that persecuting voice and recognize it as a warped, archaic defense mechanism that is trying to keep you safe from the humiliation you used to receive. You have to build what we call self-efficacy, the psychological proof that you are capable of successfully executing tasks.